Guess what, Lions? For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to exclusive bonus audio content and help this program grow by joining the Lions of Liberty Pride. To learn more, head over to lionsofliberty.com/support.
Welcome to Electric Libertyland, here on the Lions of Liberty podcast, your weekly shot of culture, comedy, and liberty with your host, Brian McWilliams.
Oh, yeah. Hello, 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 my lovely liony sugar beets. Yes, my sweet beets out there. Hey, everybody. This is going to be a little segment that I want to do before I get into the show proper. So you're going to hear me introduce the show all over again in about 3 minutes. But there's just too much going on. And I wanted to address one thing really quickly right at the top of the show before I bring my guest today, which is Robin Koerner, and we get into the topic of toxic masculinity. Because with all these great guests I've been having, I haven't had a chance to actually do many current events, which is what this show is supposed to be focused on. So I want to do a quick handling of a topic or two at the top of this show, and I'm going to be doing a lot more talking in a bonus episode for our Pride group. So unfortunately this week, guys, most of ELL will be Pride only in its current events format. However, trust me, the stuff with Robin coming up is fantastic. Now, that being said, top of the show, I have to talk about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the fact that despite Rand Paul's objections, despite the objections of virtually all Americans and anybody who should remember all of the horrible things that President Obama did with the NSA, the FBI, and all the spying apparatus on domestic Americans, as well as Americans abroad, regarding brazen violations of our basic rights under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, of course. That didn't seem to matter because Section 702 was successfully passed through the House and then successfully passed through the Senate with little opposition. I think there were maybe 40 senators that opposed it. That's just insane. And don't quote me on that number, by the way. But that is absolutely ridiculous, especially considering the fact that the president even countermanded his own tweet and his own support. You know, he's voicing support for this FISA program and the Section 702 and the NSA's ability to spy on people. And then in another tweet condemning it because that was exactly what Obama did, using these secret FISA courts to spy upon Donald Trump, to use this GPS document, so the theory goes, allegedly, uses this GPS document, which was created and paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC, to then open up the emails and open up the wiretaps and enable them to listen in on Donald Trump and then try to claim collusion. Now, that's one thing that's shocking enough. And in conjunction with that, it also came out this week, after we get slapped in the face with Section 702's renewal, it also comes out this week that the NSA, which was required to keep I think it's something like 5 years of information about surveillance and data and records like that, but they just lost it. And there's several lawsuits, more than several lawsuits, that are going on right now, which legally required the NSA to keep all of those records of all of this documented spying that was going on, which we know occurred. But no, guess what? Oh, no. The NSA lost it. Which, of course, brings up the question of who is watching the watchers. And this echoes even more thoroughly because the news that just came out today, and I'm recording this on Tuesday, fresh off the presses for you guys in the morning. But the news came out that not only is the NSA deleting things and blocking things, but also the FBI agents that were working with Mueller, working on all these investigations, working with Comey, working to basically undermine Donald Trump, and working to push the narrative of Russia collusion through. We're texting back and forth about how he's such a joke, texting back and forth about what has now, according to certain members of Congress, been referred to as a secret society from text messages that have been released from Peter Strzok and his lover, saying that there's a secret society working against Donald Trump. Those people who have a clearly documented bias from within the FBI, showcasing the deep state at work and the deep state's heavy bias against not only Donald Trump, but perhaps the entire Republican side of things, let alone libertarians. God knows what they think of us. But the FBI says that they do not have the records of some 5,000 text messages, something like that. They lost 5 months worth of information, and it just coincidentally happens to be the 5 months leading up to the election and the 5 months where all of this was going on. All of the most important texting and all of the most important collusion going on between these FBI agents and who knows who else. That's what they happen to lose. And in the wake of all of this, Section 702 is passed. Just sit back and take that and let it wash over you. Let the waves of ineptitude, the waves of clear violations of law, because you're not allowed to delete, destroy any evidence pertaining to a criminal case. And that is, by the way, what is ongoing here, not only with the NSA, but also with the FBI. And also let the wave wash over you. Let it soak into your skin that our politicians that passed this bill and renewed Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, they did this knowing full well that it was just used against them internally, knowing full well that this goes on a continued basis, knowing full well that all of these apparatus are stonewalling Congress in their attempts to get basic information and basic accountability back. And they still passed it. Now, there's a lot of things you could take away from that. Number one, you could say that these people are just imbeciles who are completely brainwashed by the capabilities that they think that the NSA has in preventing terrorist attacks, even though there has not been a single terrorist attack that we can actually trace back to any of these programs. All the terrorist attacks foiled were false flags, well, not even false flags, were operations that were already planned and put into place by the FBI to ensnare terrorists. So basically, FBI created plots that they then diffused themselves. Well done, guys. That's like intentionally trying to have a baby just to abort it. Doesn't make much sense. But not only that, so that's one option. Maybe they're just completely blinded. Option number two is that they know full well that the NSA is doing this and they just don't give a damn. Because all of the establishment shills are on one team. All of the people that are in government, to stay in government, to grow government, could give two damns about Donald Trump having his rights violated, because they all unanimously would have preferred to have Hillary Clinton in there. And to them, the ends justifies the means, of course, being the spying apparatus, which they have now renewed in perpetuity. That is a disgusting and terrifying thing. And I think that is more than likely what the actual scenario is. That all of these people are completely happy knowing that they're all being spied upon because they are on the inside. They are part of this owl-worshipping Illuminati cult that is the Senate and the House. And anybody that happens to be on the outside, well, leave them to the wolves. All right, that's enough at the top of the show. I will link to those in the show notes. You can find that at lionsofliberty.com/ELL56. Otherwise, guys, our Pride students are going to get the rest of this week's extra special bulletin where I will talk about my encounters with the Reason Foundation for a school choice event that I attended tonight, as well as talking about some of the other breaking events that are going through the news cycle. So, without further ado, I usher you into the regular episode that was supposed to air today. All right, welcome to Electric Libertyland, everybody. I am Brian McWilliams, as always, your lovely and slightly hoarse-voiced host for this episode. I was telling our guest today, who I'll introduce in just a moment, that I'm suffering a little bit from the hangover bug. I had a little bit too much fun last night, but it wouldn't be Electric Libertyland if I wasn't slightly inebriated or otherwise impaired. So today, guys, our episode is episode number 56, which means you can find it at lionsofliberty.com/ELL56 for any of the show notes, more information, and article links on our guest. A man who has been on the show before. I find him to be not only informative, but also very entertaining. The one and only Robin Koerner. How you doing, Robin?
I am well, Brian. How are you? Well, I know how you're doing because you've just told us. Yeah. So maybe I'm doing a little better than you. You know?
Hopefully. I mean, I think most people on a daily given basis are doing slightly better than me. So, which is great because I always have something to aspire to.
Okay. Now you had to do the intro to this show twice for reasons that the listeners don't need to know. And the first time you said this was show number 57, and this time you said 56.
I corrected myself, so it's good and
okay.
it dropped out because I said 57, and then I was like, you know what, I think that's wrong. And God agreed. God killed off the audio recording to make sure that the people.
That's what it was. Well, good. There you go. There were no accidents.
Little divine intervention never hurt anybody.
Mm.
So before we get deep into it, so Robin is famous for coining the phrase "Blue Republican," and that's something which I think is still holds water to this day. But you've taken that and really exploded onto the scene even more so. You're an author now with a book called "If You Can Keep It" about liberty, and I should read the whole title: "If You Can Keep It: Why We Nearly Lost It and How We Get It Back," talking about liberty. And also, you are now on the faculty for the Foundation for Economic Education. So you were telling me a little bit before when we were just chatting, but I'm curious to hear, how that's going, how you got involved with FEE, because that's just an organization that I absolutely love.
FEE is fantastic. I don't just like the fact that obviously they're a bunch of liberty lovers, although they are. I kind of like their humane spirit, right? And their kind of broader perspective. They don't get stuck in, repeating arguments about how many libertarians can dance on the head of a pin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I love FEE. And I think it happened, my joining them as a member of their faculty network, I think is the title or something. Yeah, that's what they call it. I think the instigator of my being given that honor was probably Jeffrey Tucker, because for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been finding myself in rooms with him, on stages with him increasingly. And we've had some great back and forths.
So this is voluntary, though. This isn't like you were stalking him and you're hiding in the podium kind of thing. This is all voluntary, correct?
Oh, we're libertarians. Everything's voluntary, right? No, of course. No, yeah. I mean, I don't know. There were just a couple of events with him and me where, I don't know, here and there around the place. I think there was an ISFLC, DC one, Students for Liberty. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was actually a FEE one, and they invited me to participate before they made me a network faculty member, whatever, something like that. But anyway, I've been spending kind of more time with Jeffrey on and off at certain events. And I think he was the one who was kind enough to suggest, they're adding me to their roles, as it were. And I was down in Atlanta where the FEE offices are. Oh, I'm going to say, I think it was fall 2016, so maybe a year and a quarter ago. And we had a lovely lunch with some of the staff down there. And, they told me that I was now, it's an honorary thing, right? It's a recognition of, I guess, one's thinking, one's ability to articulate.
An illustrious company, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And it is, too. I mean, there's such fantastic writers and minds who also write on FEE. So it's a real honor. And but more practically for me, I would say now it's my best platform in terms of just getting large numbers of people to see, my writing about the things that I care about. And obviously, if you're anything of a, dare I say, public intellectual, any value you add is proportional to the number of minds that you influence, right? So having a platform like FEE is fantastic, and I really am grateful for it. And some of, I've put quite a bit of stuff out on FEE now, and some of it's done very well. I'm happy to be a part of that. And also, actually, I should say last year I did one of my political communication trainings at FEEcon. FEE had their first convention in Atlanta.
Oh, and I didn't even realize that they had that. Was it pretty robust?
I'm going to go even further than that. I'm going to say it might have been the best liberty convention I have ever been to in my life.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, wow, indeed. I think a lot of us were pretty blown away from it, by it. But from it, so I'm hoping to get an invite to the next one this year. We shall see, right?
I would presume. I mean, it's not a party without Robin Koerner there. And, you are in the faculty after all, and
As long as the party's just, involves eating too much food and drinking copious quantities of British tea, then it's a party. But other than that, I can be pretty tame.
Well, I am a big cheerleader for you, and I love the success that you're having. So that's awesome. And
Thank you,
anytime
sir.
that you can have a bigger
that.
platform is great. So, and that's where
Thank you.
So the article today that I wanted to talk about was a recent article that you had written for FEE, and it was called "The Cure for Toxic." Oh, hold on. I started talking and then my page froze. The cure for toxic masculinity is real masculinity. And I don't want to, I'll give you the soundbite to sum up what the story is about. And then we could talk a little bit about the themes, your arguments within it, and how it's reflective in what's going on today in society.
All right. Wow.
Not to put you on the spot. I mean, I could take a
I'm
shot
just thinking,
at it,
how do I summarize it briefly, right? I mean, okay, so first of all, the cure for toxic masculinity is real masculinity. The word toxic should be in quotes, right?
Right.
Because like many people, this whole notion of toxic masculinity, I find the notion somewhat, toxic. But obviously it's a phrase that's out there and it's something that people are thinking about right now. And I have felt for many years, and I've written articles a few years ago. In fact, the first on the topic that I wrote was provocatively called "What Women Want," and I wrote that on Huffington Post. And it's probably the most kind of personal article I've ever written in terms of what it kind of gave away about myself.
Mm-hmm. What was the response to that, by the way? What was it?
Really positive.
Okay.
Because look, here's the thing, and here's, I guess, kind of the broader point that I'm making when I kind of dip my toe into gender politics, which I don't often do. But I think there's a lot going on now. Obviously, there's the whole SJW phenomenon, and a lot of them are talking about gender in one way or another. And there's been, I think the pendulum is swinging, but there has been a fear among a lot of normal people to experience themselves and celebrate themselves as robustly gendered, as being male or female, as like a primary identifier. Obviously we've come through decades of, it's all socialized. All the differences are socialized.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm sure your listeners know exactly what I mean. Yeah. And so,
yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's right. So what we've done is certainly have made a lot of millennial men. I would say my generation and younger, but as I said, the pendulum might be swinging at the Gen Z. But I think certainly Generation X and millennials, we are scared of being men because we don't understand how to do that in a way that enables women to celebrate being women and to feel like women. We're scared to indulge in our gender polarity in case it's misinterpreted, in case we will be accused of or be seen as being aggressive or even predatory. There was the idea that I talked about in my original article, What Women Want, a couple of years ago. I remember being brought up with the idea that, no means no. And so obviously, if ever you're chasing a woman, the fact that you have to chase indicates that she's not interested, right? So you should stop. I mean, that was the entire sophistication of my understanding of dealing with.
And really, so was I was raised in a really similar sense and with the same understanding. And also, my father and I growing up would watch a lot of older movies, Westerns, stuff like that. He was a big film buff. And that traditional role of male and the way you interact, the way you respond and treat women, respectful, you can still be strong and masculine. And even, like you said, people were worried about being too aggressive, but it's not a problem with being aggressive. I feel if you know the boundaries and
indeed.
You can be aggressive in discussing or aggressively going up to someone to speak to them, or even inviting them to your bedroom. However, that all has to be couched within this framework of safety and responsibility.
Right, and mutual respect. And which gets us actually to the article you're asking me about. I've been listening, with some surprise to all of these stories that have been coming out in droves, right, about these guys who
Aziz
apart from anything else,
Ansari's and the Louis C.K.'s of the world.
Yeah, all of that, exactly, right? And they're just disrespectful. And I'm just thinking, well, this is bad manners. This is bad manners. This is bad manners. And it's, to me, it's not toxic masculinity. It's not masculinity at all, right? It's these kind of qualities, these more, let's say, assertive or confident, more traditionally masculine qualities. I know, as I've grown older, I know increasingly that they are appreciated by women in the right context. But the context is the establishment of mutual respect and trust, which means that, what you don't shout at a woman something rude out of your car window. You don't make a crude suggestion to her if she's sitting there with a kid in a coffee shop. You don't whip out your genitalia just because you've had one too many to drink for whatever you think that's going to get you, right? And the reason I give those examples is because when these stories started coming out, I started asking my female friends do these things happen to you on a regular basis? If so, give me a couple of examples from the last month or two. And these were examples that I got. And I was just shocked at the sheer frequency of awful disrespect by rude men. And to think that we have a problem with masculinity or sexuality is wrong. It's just bloody bad manners.
Well, I think it's bad manners, but it's also, I think, draws from, because I was trying to think of, after reading the article, you ask the question, why do you think this is okay? Like, for these men that do these things, that yell out the window, that whip their dicks out, why do they think that's okay to do? And I was trying to come up with my own theories on what could cause it. And I went through various pathways of thought, which, one leading to, is this a matter of different parenting and the breakdown of kind of a nuclear family thing where you don't have the family structure? Or is it a matter of looking at the way people raise their children nowadays, wherein you used to have, in a traditional sense of child rearing, you would have a strong parental figure that says, this is right, this is wrong. And, there was an emphasis on being strict, at least to some extent, in the way you brought the child. There were rules and boundaries you were supposed to follow, and the children would graduate to adulthood at some point. And it seems now to me that a lot of this can be rooted in these people bringing up their children and either being a little bit disconnected or self-involved and not raising their children properly to know what's right or wrong, and never actually putting the framework in place where people now feel that they are adults. Like, so much of this behavior is childish.
It's very childish.
And it's like, you need to become an adult at some point. When you become a man, when you are masculine and a man, you have to identify as an adult and act like an adult.
And I think what my article is getting to a little bit is, if you have told men that they can't be men, and you've kind of falsely collapsed the distinction between men and women, then you've made it really difficult to actually explain what being an adult means with respect to the other, right? To the other gender.
Right.
Like, if you tell a man, if you tell a man that everybody, well, no, I mean, I'm just, it's because there's somebody in the room with me laughing, and and I'm aware of the laughter, and I was distracted. No, but, I used the example in the article, right, that we don't want the same things. And if we culturally can't have a conversation, in some respects we do, but if we can't have a conversation about what is different between men and women and what it is that men might do that is received differently, and why, if we can't actually just share facts about gender relations because we have so politicized them, right? And everybody's even scared of being gendered and scared of, offending somebody by talking about gender, then you just can't get to the truth of this.
Yeah, and it's like everybody's terrified of being identified as the cliche man or woman in the traditional roles.
Yeah, and I think, if you... the article's saying, look, if there is a toxic version of masculinity, let's just use that term because it's out there. You're not going to get rid of it by telling men that they're awful at every turn, and part of the reason they're awful is, hey, because they're men. Where do they go with that? What you got to do is this old-fashioned thing of actually modeling healthy masculinity, just like you have to model healthy femininity, which means you have to have a form of masculinity, a kind of a cultural norm that is celebratory and, worthy of celebration. So basically, I'm cheerleading for gender polarity and, masculinity and femininity and men and women. Because one thing, and how I kind of got interested in this was having come from my kind of Generation X upbringing and, lay off, no means no. Mm-hmm. As the older I got, the more I discovered that there's a kind of a beautiful dance between men and women, where men get to provide the masculine pole that is that kind of sets the contextual field in which the woman can experience themselves as really womanly or feminine, right? Mm-hmm. Now, not all women want to do that. Okay, sure, all the time. But a lot of attraction is about that. A lot of the excitement of being gendered beings is about that. And if we're comfortable with that and we can enjoy it and we can reference that without having to apologize for referencing it, right? Without having to be coy about it, then, I think we can turn to these men and just say, what the hell are you doing? This is pathetic. This isn't masculine. This is just pathetic. And we won't have to pay it so much attention, but the attention we will be paying it will be more accurate because we'll be calling it as what it is, which is it's bloody disrespect. It's not masculine, rather than having some weird ideological discussion about some fake kind of masculinity that isn't masculinity at all.
Right. And then also I find it's interesting that you've got people that are going out there like, I'll use Aziz Ansari just because of that story. Recently, everybody's still talking about it, but you've got a guy that puts himself forth as this hyper feminist, which is what is being made into the ideal by social conversation these days, is against the traditional masculinity and for this feminist masculinity, where people are here. I guess here's my problem with this. You see what happens with people. They have their public persona where they're saying, I'm all for women and I'm sensitive and, women's rights are always paramount and men are terrible. And then you see how they act in private and they resort back to being,
the hypocrisy.
Yeah. The hypocrisy is clearly apparent. And by promoting this false femininity on everybody, then you say, and granted, there's some men, which I'm sure that's their natural personality, but men are going to adapt this and say, okay, well, I have to be this way. This is what I'm being told, even though it might go against their base instincts or who they are, or just a basic gender outlook on life. And by forcing them to adopt this, it's just basically putting on a mask. And that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is it. I mean, as in relationships, so in culture, right? It serves everyone if you set the rules, you set the norms and the expectations, such that people can tell their truth without being scared of the consequences. Precisely. Which means that we all have to grow up, right? Which in as much as we all have to start remembering, and this is a broader point about the whole social justice thing, that, offense is never given, it's only ever taken. Mm-hmm. And, and there it is. At some level, there it is, right? Because I also, I mean, again, you see, the thing that's pathetic about these men, I mean, there is something pathetic and I would say extremely unmasculine about exactly what you've described, right? Which is,
well, it's this
pretending is having to say again.
It's like a sneak attack. It's like it's luring them in under false pretenses, and then once they take the bait, you spring the trap on them. It's because as a man, you're right, but I was going more to the fear. Oh, okay. Like the cowardliness of it. Mm-hmm. It's like, look, if you have a certain experience of, if you're a man and you experience your masculinity in a certain way and women in a certain way, then I mean, don't lie. Try and move the conversation in the way that you feel is real. Or you don't have to participate, but don't hold yourself out to be something you're not. Right. It's like homogenizing masculinity too. Is that you want to celebrate different people, and diversity of thought is something that has been pushed to the side so often now. And it's the same thing with this discussion with toxic masculinity and femininity as well.
And one thing we're starting to see and I do believe that we've hit kind of peak SJW and the pendulum is starting to swing back now. What you need is like one or two cultural or political leaders who just call it, right? Mm-hmm. Who say the emperor has no clothes here. This is why Jordan Peterson, right, is getting such massive play.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so many people that are feeling this. So somebody comes along and voices back to them what they already feel. And then it's kind of like this relief, this intellectual and spiritual relief, right? That, oh, I'm not, that's okay. It's,
it's shocking how the reaction to him, because he's got people, and I'm a huge fan of his. I really, the recent appearance he had on, I think it was Channel 4 in the UK.
Oh, it was excruciatingly wonderful.
God, it really was. But it's like you're watching all these false narratives get thrown at him, and there's someone just putting words in his mouth. You said this. He's like, I never said that. You're extrapolating from this. And it's like just watching him very calmly destroy our world piece by piece and brick by brick, tear it down. But then, you look at the arguments, and it ties into what we were saying earlier when he's talking about the broader, I guess, corporate world and the differences between men and women, and how you can't just ignore them and say it's all social, and it's not true. We'd have
exactly. And kind of the meta point here is that nobody should be scared of insisting of having these discussions in empirical terms. Let anybody make any factual claim, and then let's approach it with evidence.
Right.
And if anybody hears a factual claim and then they jump up and down because they think it offends whatever their favorite victim group is, sorry.
Yeah.
But not sorry. Sorry, but not sorry, right?
Well, this might be a nice segue into the next topic I want to talk about, which is the LA. Well, there's women's marches all over the place that just happened yesterday. So we're recording this on Sunday. The LA, the women's marches everywhere, including Los Angeles, happened yesterday, and they were well covered. Apparently, very well attended. Some of them were saying double the numbers came out as opposed to the initial one, but when we're talking about these, I guess people kind of screaming and going on about, I guess they're not even sure about what they're upset about. And I'm seeing my takeaway from the women's marches is that I see a lot of women going out, and they've got the pink pussy hats on, and they've got their signs, but it's hard for me to take away a message as to what they're actually out there for, especially women in the United States. Women in the United States have it pretty well compared to other nations. And I look at their marching, and they're talking about the wage gap, which has been debunked quite a bit. They're talking about, the sexual misconduct that's going on, which of course there's some credence to that. But overall, it feels to me that it's more outrage against Donald Trump without really being able to name what they're that upset about, and more just a glorification of, yes, we're going to go out there and do it just to have fun. And it's kind of like noise for the sake of making noise and just feeling good. So, and what's your take on it? And I don't want to put my views on you, because they may be drastically different.
So you're saying it's kind of like the current version of the Rage Against the Machine, right?
Yeah, it's exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't turned on the news for days.
Smart man.
I'm kind of more. I am more focused on this. What I see, this kind of broader change, or that I think is kind of going on in historic time, if you like. That is the pendulum hitting its peak, right? Hitting its extreme in one way. And I'm seeing this in many different ways, right? So if I can kind of step back from your question a bit, because then I can say something that I know a little bit more about, but I believe related. I was on a panel doing a panel on identity politics here in Seattle not long ago, and I told the story of a friend of mine, a woman who is she's a PhD student and teaches in the history department at UW, right, University of Washington. And she was put on. She and a couple of other people were put under tremendous pressure for simply refusing to cancel their class on a day when there was an anti-Trump march. Now, her having her class, which was scheduled, didn't stop any of her students going to the anti-Trump march. She's not pro-Trump. She just wanted to do her job that day because she's got a responsibility to her students, right? But the majority of the teaching assistants in the history department, I'm not talking about gender studies, right?
Yeah.
Were made her and a couple of others feel very uncomfortable because she didn't kind of show this she didn't politicize her schedule, basically.
And this is a public, and UW, I believe, is a state school, right? Or is it?
I believe so.
Yeah, so it's it's a public institution, and by saying, okay, we're going to cancel classes for a Trump rally, you're making a very politicized statement that is very pro-Democrat.
Indeed, and for what it's worth, this individual who didn't want to cancel her class for some time had to share an office with a guy who had I don't know if it was Che Guevara or Karl Marx or socialist worker. It was one of those kind of very extreme left-wing posters, which for me, I wouldn't put that up in as a teacher in my office, knowing that I've got students of all views coming to me, right? Because they're absolutely inappropriate. But anyway, there she was. So I told this story, and I said, I think people, even in democratic Seattle, are looking at this kind of thing and going, enough is enough. And I am increasingly speaking to Democrats who are looking at, let's say, the more extreme wing of their party, the hard left, if you like, and turning away from those who have a more extreme idea, who share their ideology, towards those who share a more civil and decent way of conducting politics, right? Which means that they're starting to find, I don't want to say allies, but they're starting to be able to talk more with folks with whom they may not have been partisan allies before, right? Because there are so many people across the spectrum going, well, look, we might disagree on some of the issues, but meta-politically, this way of doing politics has to change. Now, when I told this story at the panel, a middle-aged Black man came up to me afterwards and said, Robin, thanks for, giving a talk. And I just want to let you know that what you said about UW was, quote, absolutely accurate, unquote. And I said, well, thank you very much. How do you know? He said, because I am a law professor there.
Oh, nice.
And he said, I have to give a class on diversity issues next semester, and I am, quote, absolutely terrified, unquote. Now, this guy, this African-American law professor, was one of those children back in the day who had to sit at the back of the bus because of the color of his skin, half a century ago, right? And there he is wondering, how the hell do we deal with this?
Yeah.
And he said that some of his the Black students in his class, he is aware, feel unable to share their honest political views in their class because they're concerned they may not be sufficiently left-wing and identitarian for other students of color in their class. And I was like, oh my God. So I was fascinated by this. I went and met this professor a few days later on campus and we talked more about it. But when it's got to that point, right, it's Herbert Stein's law. Anything that can't carry on won't, right? And so I come out of that panel, I'm talking to folks from the audience, and, I ended up talking to a Democratic consultant who completely agreed with me, which now that's not what you expect.
No,
right?
No,
but I'm seeing this happen all over the place now.
Well, it's like the stories you hear a lot now with these campus protests, the SJWs, where they're interrupting classes. Like I was reading some recent article about students interrupting a class on history, and they were coming in and marching around and yelling because they said it was too focused on white corporate owners talking about the industrial era. Meanwhile, it's just because that's history. In America, there weren't a lot of Black people leading giant corporations at the time because, that whole slavery thing happened. So, but they're marching around, and it's actually the Black students are getting fed up. And now these Black students in this circumstance weren't, I guess, too concerned about appearing enough on the social justice spectrum, but they are the ones that stand up and say, get the fuck out of here. I'm trying to get an education. I'm paying $50,000 for this. Stop interrupting the class and get out.
Do you know, I asked the professor that I just mentioned to you, when we sat down for lunch a few days later and discussed this at length, why, how this is being allowed to carry on, right?
Right. Why because is it not being expelled it takes away from the education. And the money. I mean, these people are paying a lot of money for an education, and to have it interrupted constantly. Yeah. Expel them, suspend them. I mean, you shouldn't be afraid to actually keep some sort of peace and calm there.
Well, so I asked him exactly that question in pretty much that way. And he actually said that the interesting thing was, it was his impression that a lot of the administration are actually, they don't have, now I don't want to put words into his mouth, but the gist was that they're actually lacking in their own moral confidence, in their own responsibilities, in their own worldview. In other words, he thinks that they're second guessing themselves, that maybe there's something here that they're missing, that maybe that, students today, some of these, let's call them SJWs for now, right? That maybe they do have a grievance that is akin to the grievances that this gentleman legitimately had when he was a young man sitting at the back of the bus because, he was black on the East Coast, for example. And we went back and forth on it. And I was like, well, look, in a way, we all have a moral and intellectual responsibility to be prepared to change our views when we get new information, and that information might well include information about the experiences of other human beings in very different situations from ours. But that is not at odds with also saying, my job is to administrate a university. The university's job is to provide an education. That means that certain things are game on this campus and some are not. Some are not in play. And if you would like to, be activists and learn how to be activists and practice being activists, then that's fine. Go do it. But don't do it here in this context, because our responsibility is to make sure, as you were saying, that people get this education in this context. And he and I agreed on that. And I would say this professor is certainly of a much more progressive persuasion than I, but we saw eye to eye on that entirely. And I think we came to a common belief that simply these the people running the asylum should actually take back the asylum, right? And on the grounds that, and there's nothing arrogant about it, right? They're not setting themselves up in some kind of with some moral superiority. It's that they have a job to do, and anybody is welcome to go elsewhere for their education if they want to be in a university that puts education above, any kind the promotion of any kind of political ideology.
Seeing that too, because I remember that was, I think it was Mizzou, Missouri University. They had this whole flap with the social justice warriors and the football team refusing to play, and all these colleges you see.
It's already breaking.
Yeah, it is, and you're saying
it's breaking.
Enrollment dropped precipitously.
Exactly. Evergreen College, the same thing. Yeah. You've got this fantastic initiative by Jonathan Haidt, Heterodox Academy. He's the evolutionary psychologist who's now working for greater intellectual diversity in the academy, doing amazing work. Obviously, you're seeing, as a less kind of formal thing, just the sheer numbers that are following people like Jordan Peterson. It's sucked in. This phenomenon has kind of sucked in so much attention, and people are so bored of it because it's collapsing under the weight of its own inconsistency, right? I gave a speech recently. I said, we live in interesting times. We are privileging the voices of some groups over others in the name of giving all groups an equal voice. We are equating speech with violence to justify doing violence against those who speak, right? Exactly. It's so Orwellian. And even if people wouldn't articulate it in that way, they can see it, they can feel it, right? The mainstream is reacting, and all of the little examples I gave, and the examples from these different colleges, and these different initiatives, it's showing that the pendulum's maxed out now. It's maxed out.
On that, because that'll go right into the next topic. I want to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back. So I want to talk to you about how this pendulum is swinging back, and in the era of Donald Trump, how that's interacting, and how you've found it with your work and helping people these political divides, how that is reacting in the world we're seeing today. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Robin Koerner. Hey guys, you might remember that I recently said that this is the libertarian moment and that we need more people to stand up and run for office. Now, if you're tired of watching liberty erode and you plan to stand up and run for office, I want you to call on a team that has over 20 years experience, Global Alliance Communications. They specialize in data analytics, identifying and mobilizing voters. They offer live voter outreach, data acquisition, compliance, recorded messages, text messaging with full social media touchpoints, and teletown halls. Campaigns of all types and sizes are encouraged to reach out, and you can find out more by visiting their website at www.gacigroup.com or email info@gacigroup.com. All right, we are back with Robin Koerner. So as I said, I want to talk more about this pendulum swinging and if it's actually going to be easier to talk to people now, even though there's still so much vitriol towards Donald Trump. And you're still seeing the media, of course, is not helping things, very politicized, a lot of left leaning. You know, I saw a recent poll where progressives trust CNN and, of course, conservatives trust Fox News. But people seem to still be very angry at Donald Trump, and it's still hard to have a discussion with people, even though empirically, if you look at his first year of presidency, America's doing pretty well. So what is your take on this?
I've got a very simple answer to this, I think, which is when it comes to controversial political topics, don't talk about them. Don't talk about them until somebody asks you to. Don't give an opinion until somebody solicits it. So much of effective political communication is finding your time, finding the right moment. And that moment, in one way or another, is the moment when the person you're trying to communicate with indicates their receptivity to you. Now, Jonathan Haidt talks about moving the bar down from must I believe it to can I believe it? Mm-hmm. And this is very much in line with what I do in my political psychology training and stuff like that, right? Most of the time, if you challenge somebody's political paradigm, their cognitive defenses are set to 100%, which means if they can find one reason to not believe what you're telling them, some reason to believe that it's false, your facts are wrong, it's incomplete, et cetera, then they will reject it.
Right. It's like the automatic rebound because people they bring in such an identity with their personalities and their beliefs that the harder you fight for it, if you don't have an opening, the harder they will push back, just out of an automatic response.
Yeah, I mean, because when you're having an argument, or let's say when there's an intellectual back and forth, if for you to be, if the other person has to kind of admit they're wrong to allow you to be right in some respect, then you've created a zero-sum game, mm-hmm. right? And intellectually a zero-sum game. And as I go into at great length in my book and in my seminars, right, paradigms are prevailing way of looking at the world. Let's say our current way of looking at it are so sticky, right? And they're neurologically sticky, they're psychologically sticky. We defend them even if we don't consciously even want to be defending them, right? It works even down at a cellular level. That's a whole other conversation. So don't go at somebody that way. It's much better to try and find the point of common ground from which you can formulate let's say a shared problem. Or a problem at least that you can perceive in broadly the same way, mm-hmm. and then have a discussion about, make the discussion more empirical. Mm-hmm. See, the problem is when you're throwing ideological claims at somebody who has a point of view, and that's what you're doing if you're having a political conversation, because the other person's having a political conversation, right? Then they can always object. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, yeah, obviously. But there's a lot of ways about talking about issues that can't be objected to ideologically because you don't make ideological assertions. You don't make general assertions. Let's say, for example, you can tell stories, right? You can actually tell a story about an individual that illustrates a point that were the person that you're talking to consider, mm-hmm. they would have to adjust whatever view they've just given you that you believe to be wrong. because the view doesn't, let's say, deal with the issue presented in the narrative. Mm-hmm. If I tell you a story about a person, you can't object to the story ideologically. That doesn't even make logical sense. You being a person too, empathize. You put yourself in it. So if you can do that, then you can get through to people in a different way, right? Instead of doing argument, you're kind of engaging human empathy. You're engaging a different part of the brain, actually.
Right.
And so we're much less resistive. If I tell you a story, I am not consciously, at least, or overtly, at least, requiring that you consent to any idea that I have or position I hold, right? Mm-hmm. That's fundamentally different from having a political argument. And one of the articles that you're going to see coming out on FISA, I think it's going to be my next one, is going to be exactly how this works. And it's going to be entitled, The Advance of Liberty Depends on Stories, Not Arguments.
All right. I will be sure to share that when I see it pop up.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Hopefully it'll come out this week. But yeah, so this is, again, to come back to the beginning of my answer to your question. I don't know, to be honest, why anybody would be getting into an argument with someone where it's just a hide into nothing. You've got to establish the common ground and or relationship, which means that it won't be a hide into nothing before you even start. And that means being patient. That means not using your political positions and arguments as an ego trip. That means not needing to be right.
And that
means playing the long game.
Yeah, that, by the way, is something that I find the liberty movement has a big problem with.
Right?
I mean, if we're being very honest, it's a real problem because people, libertarians, everybody likes to say, okay, well, I know so much, libertarians tend to be very well educated on a lot of issues economically. It just kind of goes along with the ideals and the theories. But when you take that and you start talking to somebody and these people come across as just, I know this, here's what I believe, here's the theory, you need to agree. If you don't, you're crazy or wrong. It just turns people off immediately. And what you're saying about telling stories, like I can't think of a story distinctly off the top of my head, but what I've been trying to do in my own conversations now with people that are very progressive is find that, like you're saying, that common ground wherein I'm saying, look, we want the same end result, but we just have to find a different way to get there. Let me show you a scenario in which it makes sense to achieve what you're talking about, but via the means that I would believe in. And you get more engagement. They can see, okay, I can see how that would work now.
Yeah, and you can actually kind of practice this offline even, right? In as much as you might have particular views you want to share. Let's say with a progressive friend with whom you disagree politically about the best way to solve some social or economic issue. You can literally change. You can do it on a piece of paper. Write down, the claims you're going to want to make or the assertions you're going to want to offer, and turn them into questions. Mm-hmm. Turn them into questions whose answer which lead the person you're speaking to in the direction of the answer. Right. The politics of the left are largely the politics of good intent. They tend to, the left tends to experience its support for policies as coming out of a notion of care, right? It's a care harm axis. Mm-hmm. Now libertarians can, again, you can do homework. You can make this like homework. You can reformulate your positions as statements of caring for victim groups. Mm-hmm. Like you can actually look at the things you believe and say, if X, then this group is cared for more effectively because, basically, right? So instead of saying, I love capitalism and capitalism is a great way to reduce poverty, you say, I want to reduce poverty. Here's ways that I've seen that have worked in the past. Just flip it on its head, right? Yeah. Now that might sound like trivial when I say it. It's so trivial, but we don't do it because if you go at somebody and you tell them about capitalism or banking or the monetary system, all these things that we're interested in, and we're right to be interested in them because they are so fundamental. If the topic you open with isn't something they're already interested in, you have failed to hook them.
Yeah.
If, however, rather than start your discussion about the monetary system with actual money, you start that discussion with poverty, mm-hmm. right, which might take a little reworking of the logic, but you cover exactly the same ground in a different direction, then you can have much more success.
Yeah, and that's
with the presentation of exactly the same facts.
And that's exactly, poverty is exactly the topic I've chosen. When I do talk to progressives a lot, that's one of my favorite things to talk about, because there's an instance where you can point to using the systems in place right now, this care versus harm. Progressives believe that we need to put more money into the welfare system and into food stamps and into all these social support services and just giving checks to people. Meanwhile, statistically, it hasn't worked. So you can say, okay, well, what you believe in is caring actually is harming, because the poverty rate continues to increase. The people are not escaping the poverty line. They're just simply getting money, but staying in the same socioeconomic status. So I then try to move on and argue that by going a different way, by deregulation, by creating tax-free zones to incentivize business, and programs that are more in line with libertarian thinking, I can use the context of we're both trying to get people out of poverty. And it comes across much more effective, and you get out of that whole "you don't care," don't you give a shit about the poor, all you care about is theory type of thing that libertarians fall trapped to so often.
No, that's great, and that's a good example on which to hang another really good principle of political communication, which is, especially when you're dealing with folks on the left, see them and raise them. Outflank them as a libertarian from the left in this respect. Like, say to them, I get that we've got a problem here and you want to treat the symptoms, but do you agree if we could treat the causes, then that would be better than treating the symptoms?
Right.
Like I want to treat the symptoms, but I want to go, yeah. Let's not do the harm in the first place, right?
Exactly.
So and then when you frame it that way, and then you present your, an idea that gets to the, so for example, the monetary system too, right? The 99% and the 1%. Yeah. You can say there is no tax system progressive enough to put this right if all the while we have a monetary system that necessarily funnels assets to actually a fraction of the top 1%. Yeah. That can do things with money that if the rest of us did, we'd be locked up, right? So do you agree we should at least, stop doing the harm?
Right.
And then when you bring a new fact to the discussion that is clearly rooted in the motivation of the person you're speaking to, you not only bring the wall down, you kind of become serious. Right? It's like it forces the other person to now walk with you in the same direction.
Well, we saw a perfect example of that. We were talking about the Jordan Peterson interview on Channel 4 in the UK.
Yeah.
And there was a perfect example of that, wherein he flipped the argument that the host was making, talking about free speech and use of words, and he flipped it on it and said, well, you're using your free speech to attack me on your program, so how do you equate that, if you have that ability? And she just was completely in stunned silence. And he goes, I got you. And she goes, you did get me. And she just sat there really trying to find a way to argue against it, because he had used her own terminology and her own worldview to basically put her in a box from which she could not escape.
Yeah, I mean, that was he's very clever, and he was debating really effectively.
Yes.
I'm talking about not having a debate. In some ways, making what could otherwise be a debate a shared exploration.
Right. Yeah. Trying to get on the same team and a collaborative discussion rather than a debate.
And it can always be done. Now there are some. You started with the anti-Trump stuff and some of that. Look, we don't need to get everybody. We don't even need a majority. We need a decent minority. And a lot of effective political communication is to identify the people who really aren't worth the time and then move on to the ones who are, right? I mean, those people do exist. I mean, there's lots of them. And, so that don't forget that, right? Like we can look at all this stuff going on, this insanity, this aggression on both sides, this identitarianism on both sides, and we can just say, I'm not playing. Like, just don't play. Like, it's not worth our energy, because there's so many other people who are watching that and thinking, oh my God, this is ridiculous, that don't yet agree with us politically, but that who we could reach more easily. And we could actually use our shared disgust at all that extreme nonsense as a point in common. Right.
And on that exact topic, I had made on a podcast a few episodes ago, I had said that this was, in fact, because of all of the social justice warrior initiatives going on, because of the anti-Trump hate, that this actually could provide us with the true libertarian moment, which everybody was talking about being years ago, but it could actually be now, because people will be more open to hearing ideas from our perspective, because they're against the Democrats, they're against the Republicans. People are sick of all of the politicization, and they're open to new ideas coming from a different perspective.
Yes, no, that's right. I mean, we're going to see, I think, a change in the flavor of politics over the next half a generation that's going to surprise people. For example, the swing of the pendulum might involve this. Politics, when people think of politics now, they think of, big groups of people espousing, kind of making big claims that are kind of morally loaded about large groups of people. It's all kind of general and abstract and declarative, right? Politics is largely declarative. Now, there have been other times in history when the pendulum has swung, where people choose their politicians much more, not on the big statements they make, but on how do they treat the people that they meet in their lives? How do they actually live their lives? What goes on inside the walls of their home, right? It becomes much more micro than macro, much more concrete, much kind of human, maybe. Where we're already seeing, of course, more and more politicians, and this is true both sides of the pond, getting support because of their gentleness, their decency, their civility, their authenticity, right? Those things that you can have regardless of your political views. There's a gentleman in England, a conservative member of parliament called Rees-Mogg.
Okay.
And as his name suggests, he lives in the wrong century. The guy's like the last aristocrat, right? Everything about him puts him outside the mainstream. He's a Catholic with quite orthodox Catholic views on things like abortion, which, in Europe, that's not an issue. Everybody's pro-choice in Britain. Everybody's pro-choice in Europe, right? His views are really outside the mainstream, but he is completely and he runs up against the kind of the inverted snobbery, right? Oh, here's someone from privilege, right? No, but he doesn't try to hide it. He just puts out who he is, and he's this soft-spoken person who, like he has said publicly, he's never changed a diaper in his life. And he wouldn't, because Nanny would be very upset if he tried. And when the interviewer asked him which nanny, the nanny he had when he was a boy or the nanny of his 5 children, he says it's the same nanny, which tells you something about this family. Now, this guy is so, in his views, in his way of life, so removed from the people he represents. But right now, he might be the biggest political celebrity in England. Why? Because he's gentle, he's decent, he's civil, he's soft-spoken, and he's completely authentic. And all of these things, in other words, he's an antidote, right? He's like the anti-SJW. He's anti-identitarian politics. He's anti-grandstanding. He's anti-big declarations. Now, so not only will we see potentially an ideological swing, we might see kind of a meta-political swing, and a swing in how politics is done. And so it's really important to me, and a lot of my writing is about this now, that we can see this, the liberty movement can see this and understand it and gen up on how to exploit it, right? On how to come off right with the people who we want to listen to us. Because as I said earlier, it's not about making the perfect argument. That helps, but that doesn't win a supporter. Winning an argument isn't the same as winning a supporter.
Yeah, exactly right.
You know? And so
in fact,
all of these things.
Winning an argument, oftentimes, they can have the reverse effect.
Absolutely. You've said it exactly right. Yeah. Win your argument at what cost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And that's what saying overarchingly, libertarians win a lot of arguments. I'll put it that way. To our detriment.
Yeah. I know you've got to wonder, actually, what an argument won really is if you haven't actually changed the mind of the person you've spoken to.
Yeah, all it does is leave them feeling a little bit sour towards you, embarrassed most likely, and more adamant in their views to find a way in which you were wrong the next time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's
right.
Self-defeating.
Yeah. I mean, part of something that's worth taking to heart for a lot of libertarians is, in the long run, you will have a much better effect for liberty in America if, in an interaction, rather than get out the entire libertarian canon, an interaction with some new person, you give them a surprisingly good experience of a libertarian that challenges whatever they think is true of people that they give that identity to. Right?
Don't hit them with taxation is theft right off the bat.
Do you know what? Don't hit them with that at all. Right, because if it is, let them work that out and see if they're either going to get there and believe it or not. If they don't believe it and you just tell it to them, what does it give you? The fee, since we started talking about fee at the beginning of the show, they have quite sophisticated data analytics, and I can't remember the exact context in which I was told this, but I was told that they have tracked the impact of a number of libertarian statements throughout all of the things that they publish. And the one that they believe has and there's like 100 of them, right? Of kind of libertarian tropes. And the one that they have identified as being the least effective of all is taxation is theft.
Yeah. It's a darling among hardcore libertarians for all the wrong reasons. And I'm not surprised to hear that at all. Although I am fascinated. I got to do some research into these tropes that they're researching, because it sounds really interesting. But because I'd love to see if there was a list saying what are the most effective, and maybe explore that in another podcast.
Yeah, no, I actually would love to. When Jeffrey, I think it was Jeffrey who told me that, I got excited. I said, one day I want to sit down and look at this data. Because obviously, I'm in political psychology and communications for the purposes of advancing liberty. And I am also an empiricist, right? I have what I think are good ideas sometimes, but if the data tell me they ain't good, then I'm the first to move on, right?
Because it's like, if we could find, if they've got the data and say, what are the most persuasive arguments for libertarianism for which to open a conversation or to put forth during a campaign, I mean, that is incredibly valuable to the movement, and to, I'm sure they can monetize that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, quite.
But no, that's
I mean, this does sound like a good time to plug my book, actually, because even though I don't have that data set,
that's perfect. Because I'll let you plug away, because I'm going to wrap the episode anyway. So get a good book plug in there.
Well, I was just going to say, since we're right on top of this topic now, even in the absence of that exact list of data from FEE, my book, which you kindly mentioned earlier, If You Can Keep It, Why We Nearly Lost It and How We Get It Back, is exactly about how to message libertarianism in a way that actually wins supporters, not just arguments. And, I've got quite a track record on that, even though I say it myself. So I would invite folks that really want to know how to do this, to actually, if you go to robinkoerner.com, which is my new website, ROBINKOERNER.com, if you order the book from there, I'll send you a personally signed copy. If you're within the United States.
I'll go and visit myself.
Well, that sounds like a good idea, Brian. And so for any of your, listeners, I'd love to send them a signed copy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, make sure if you order that copy, make sure to mention it so Robin does know that he can address it to a friend of the Lions of Liberty.
Well, you know what? I will know anyway, Brian, because I'll see the massive peak in sales from when the show gets published.
Right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Robin. It's always great having you on, and I appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday, which is when we're recording, to put forth these really interesting thoughts about the liberty movement, about political discussion, and of course about masculinity and femininity in this day and age. So thank you so much for coming on. Guys, I want to thank you for listening to the Lions of Liberty podcast and remind everybody that we have multiple shows here. We've got Mark with in-depth interviews with the liberty movement on Mondays. We actually have a Libertarians in Living Room Drinking Liquor show, which you just heard this Monday as well. And those are always fun. That's where Robin had initially come on.
Yes, I remember that.
Always a good time. Just John Odermatt with Felony Fridays every Friday, looking at the injustice within the criminal justice system. And guys, please do give us a review on iTunes. If you'd like to support the show, go to lionsofliberty.com/support. And we now have a donation page in case you're big in the crypto market and want to donate some cryptocurrency. So with all that being said, I am Brian McWilliams. That was Robin Koerner. And from Electric Libertyland, always stay plugged in to liberty.